Let's do this. Early on, I'm dealt pocket threes on the button. Under the gun +1 opens to 100. I call, we're heads up. The flop comes 9-3 deuce with 2 hearts. Starting off with a bang, we flop middle set in the biggest game of my life. Under the gun +1 leads for 225. It's basically a pot-sized bet. The opponent is a rec player who does not seem like the type that would ever fold an overpair to a raise. If he's betting a lot here, I imagine he has something decent. I make it 600. The player tanks for a good chunk of time. I'd love to see him come over the top. Instead he folds. I'm okay with it though. Winning a hand in the beginning of the session does a lot to help settle the nerves. Later I pick up ace-queen offsuit in the small blind. Under the gun +1 opens to 75. He's been by far the most aggressive player pre-flop. The cutoff calls. I probably have the best hand and have good card removal. I 3-bet to 400. Under the gun +1 isn't going to let me have it without a fight. He makes the call. The cutoff folds. I'm playing a big pot, heads up, out of position. The flop comes king jack 9 with 2 hearts. I have a gut shot straight draw with an over and a backdoor flush draw. It's currently not much, but with all the high cards out there, as a 3-better, I can have all kinds of hands that'll connect strongly on this board. It's possible my opponent could have connected well on this board too. I know he likes to get involved as much as possible though, so you can still have plenty of hands that won't connect at all. I down bet to 275. This is enough to potentially get my opponent to fold his weaker hands like small pocket pairs that are actually beating me, and it allows me to see the turn for a pretty cheap price if somehow I've run into the top of his range. I don't anticipate getting raised since this board is so good for my range, and I may bet this amount with very strong hands too to string my opponent along. The player folds, I risk a small amount to win a nice little pot. Once again I pick up ace-queen, this time I'm in the cutoff. Under the gun limps in for 25, I raise to 125. The big blind calls, who was the primary opponent in the previous hand. Under the gun folds, it's heads up. The flop comes jack 9-4 with 2 diamonds. The big blind checks. I don't have much except 2 overs and a backdoor straight draw. I check back. The turn is the ace of hearts. We make top pair. Despite this being a better card for me as the aggressor pre-flop, especially after I've checked back the flop, the big blind leads for 150. It's basically saying, I know the ace is generally good for you, but I have something amazing. He's representing a 2-pair or better hand. You can also play some draws this way. I call. There's not much sense in doing anything else. The river is the king of hearts. The big blind slows down and checks. I'm glad he didn't bomb it because my hand is somewhat face up, although in his mind I could potentially have ace-king as well. I put him on a big hand or a draw. Most of the draws missed and won't be able to call a bet anyway. For that reason I check.
10 high.
10 high? It's no good. The opponent announces hand without showing in an attempt to get me to turn over my cards and gain information. In smaller games, I might show my cards if it's a small pot, but in bigger games, I'm absolutely not going to do that unless I've got the winner and the opponent shows first. In this one, I've got queen 6 of diamonds in the big blind. The tightest guy at the table opens to 75 from under the gun +1. He's an older dude. The cutoff calls. I defend my big blind. We go 3 ways to the flop. It's queen jack 3 with 2 clubs. We have top pair and a bad kicker like Sam Ficken of the New York Jets. I check to the pre-flop raiser. He bets 75. Cutoff folds. I'm not sure if I'm ahead here, but I'm not quitting just yet. I call. The turn is the deuce of clubs. Flush draws got there. I check. Under the gun +1 continues betting, this time for 100. I feel like I'm getting strung along here. I already mentioned this is the tightest guy at the table, and now he's fired on both streets. I still can't fold. I call. The river is another queen. I've got trips. If I'm ahead, I don't want the opponent to check back if he has something like ace or kings, but those hands can and probably will call a bet. If somehow I'm beat, I'm certainly going to call a bet after potentially checking anyway. Given those 2 scenarios, betting seems like the most profitable option. I lead for 325. The opponent is thinking about it. I'm rooting for a call. Nope. He puts in a raise to 900. I may play a variety of hands this way. Despite having trips, queen 6 might be the worst of those. At this point, I essentially have a bluff catcher. I'm not sure if this particular player is even capable of bluffing rivers or what hands he'd turn into a bluff. I'm not even sure that he'd raise with an ace-high flush. Feels like we're up against exactly queen jack of spades or pocket jacks. I'm always wrong when I call in these spots. When trying to be more disciplined, I let it go. Before being dealt jack 10 suited in the hijack. Under the gun limps in, I don't see him do this and raise to my standard 75. The big blind calls. Under the gun calls, we're going 3 ways to the flop. It's ace queen 8 with 2 hearts. We have a double gutter. The opponents both check. Once again, it's a flop that's better for my range as the pre-flop aggressor than it is for my opponent's ranges. Plus, I have a hand with a lot of potential. I bet 125. Big blind calls. Under the gun also calls. I imagine they have 1 pair hands at best or draws. I'm not sure that they'll be able to withstand much more pressure if I keep on firing. The turn is the 7 of spades. Both players check. I'm keeping my foot on the gas as long as I still have a draw to the nuts. I fire for 375. That's enough to get rid of the big blind. He folds. Under the gun is Sticky. He calls. His range is mostly going to be capped at 1 pair of hands. I'm ready to unload the clip as long as a heart doesn't come. The river is the jack of clubs. Under the gun checks. It's a bizarre river that perplexes me. My hand goes from having no showdown value at all to having at least some. I can beat missed flush draws, but do I have a good enough hand to check back? Or should I bomb it and put a hand even as good as ace 10 to the test? I kind of think bombing it is the best option, but ultimately I check back. Under the gun turns over 7-6 of hearts. Firing big was not necessary. The opponent made a pair on the turn to go along with his flush draw, but we made a bigger pair on the river to come out victorious. We win a nice pot, get back to even for the session. A few hands later, I'm dealt pocket 5s in the big blind. The hijack limps in. The cutoff calls as well. I check. We go 3 ways to the flop. It's king 5-3 rainbow. We have middle set. Unfortunately, this pot is not that large. I need to change that. I lead for 50. When I'm in the big blind and it's a limp pot, I do this a lot with all kinds of draws. I need to balance it out with some strong hands too. The hijack calls, the cutoff folds, we're heads up, the turn is a 3, we make a boat. I'm going to continue betting with hopes that my opponent has a 3, a king, or a draw. I make it 125. The hijack calls, I like how this is going so far. The river is a jack. Let's figure out how we can make the most money. To do that, we've got to go over what hands the opponent will have and what actions he'd take with them. The draws have all missed, so if I bet, the opponent isn't going to be able to call with hands like club draws, 6-4, 7-6, ace-4, or ace-deuce. If he has any of those, I definitely want to check to induce a bluff. In addition, if I check, my opponent will almost certainly bet if he has a 3 or king-jack. He may also bet big with a hand like king-10, thinking I could have a number of holdings containing a king with kickers that won't play either. He could potentially get me off a chop. I can then put in a raise, get calls out of at least some of those hands. With all that in mind, I check. Hijack takes the bait and bets 350. I feel like Rod Tidwell. Just want to take a moment for myself to enjoy what's happening. I'm in a massive game in a pot that's getting big with a boat on the river, and everything up to this point in the hand is going exactly how I planned it. I reach over to grab a handful of black chips and announce a raise to 1100. This has to catch the opponent off guard. I have no idea what I might be up against, but given how it's played so far, I surely have the winner, unless the hijack has the last 2 3s in the deck. If that's the case, I'll be hearing from him, and I'll be paying him. The player tanks for a very long time, he gets his chips out, then shows me the money. I turn over the full house. Somehow I'm able to turn a limped pot into the biggest pot of the night for me. The hijack is in disbelief. He takes a gander at his cards and then tosses a 3 face up. The other card goes into the muck. It's a giant cooler. We get a dream flop and a dream turn to make the maximum. I've been waiting the whole session for a hand like this where I could bet big for value and get paid off. Finally happens. We win a very nice pot. We're only in for 1 bullet. Currently we're up 1800 on the session. The last hand they'll go over is another $100 bomb pot. This one is 6-handed. I haven't won one of these all night, and I've had to pay time for everyone 3 separate times, which is about 3 times as much as the average should be. My stack has been dwindling from the high points, so I'm kind of tilted from that too. I've got Queen 9 offsuit. The dealer puts out King 9-6 with 2 diamonds. We have middle pair, and not quite as many opponents as the normal bomb pot. It checks to me. Ordinarily, I might check middle pair in this spot. I'm tired of losing these though, and I've got some okay backdoor draws. I bet 275. Can't even get past one person. Cutoff calls, the button calls, small blind calls, and the big blind also calls. I'm officially done with this hand unless somehow I make a monster. The turn is the 3 of hearts. It would usually be kind of a blank, but there's almost no such thing in a bomb pot that has 5 players seeing the turn. We all check. The river is an 8. We all check again. The cutoff shows King 10 to win it. For these stakes, I'm not up that much anymore. If I get stuck again after getting out of the hole I was in earlier, I'd be even more tilted. Time to wrap up.